Thanks for having me. Just to kind of introduce myself, and my name is Jared Yax. I'm the curator of collections at the Tri-Cities Historical Museum in Grand Haven, Michigan. I'm also a firefighter medic for the city of Walker. I'm the lieutenant of Station 3 there. So went to Grand Valley State University where I studied history, archaeology, and German, and just always been interested in history. Was a Hart graduate. I graduated with Meg, I think it was in 2019, was it? So, but yeah, it's really kind of awesome to be able to combine the two disciplines together and be able to save history, kind of like the monuments men did in World War II, be able to go in, and if a disaster strikes, be able to go in and try and save what I can. So, just kind of a little bit of background. I'm going to just kind of go over the events in chronological order. I'll mention terms like incident commander and the incident command system and stuff like that. I will define and kind of explain these terms as we go on later in the lecture. So, but I'm going to try and give you just a kind of a chronological account of what we were going through during the dam breaks. So, in the summer of 2020, the Edenville Dam first broke after a pretty big torrential downpour, and then that later overwhelmed the Sanford Dam, which was downstream from it, and flooded a good chunk of the city of Midland. There were over 2,500 homes and about 1,500 other structures that were affected. About 11,000 people or so were evacuated or displaced because of this. So, two historical institutions were affected by these floods: the Midland County Historical Society and the Sanford Centennial Museum. They were both affected by about several feet of floodwaters that really kind of overwhelmed them in a short period of time with very little warning. The Midland County Historical Society was affected by about anywhere from 6 to 60 inches of water. Several buildings had their basements completely flooded out. The Sanford Museum structures were flooded with anywhere from 6 to 36 inches of water. Both institutions had about a quarter of their collections that were damaged or affected by floodwaters. So I'm going to attempt to not mess up sharing my screen here, so I can show you a couple of pictures of that. So, all right, is that working, I hope?
Yeah, we can see carnage.
Okay, good. So the just showing kind of, this is some of the casework that was in the Midland Historical Society. The case was full of water at the time, so you can see all of the objects that were in the case. And there's a little bit of that, but you can see that the objects were floating around in there and just kind of came to rest. So in this room here, this is kind of their institutional archives. You had about 22 inches or so of water, so the entire bottom shelf was submerged, and then the lower portion of these books were submerged in water. They're flat files. You had sections and casework that was completely submerged. Not only are you dealing with water, but then you've got mud and silt that had washed in along with it then too. Textile boxes were underwater. Anything that was above that 36-inch line was pretty safe. It's just we had to worry about the environment that it was now in. But the bottom boxes again were completely soaked. So we had to figure out what to do with those. This is one of the storage areas that was completely submerged underwater, and stuff was floating around in it. Just complete kind of chaos in some of these buildings. And that shows you we were still trying to pump out some of the buildings when we were starting our emergency operations. So we didn't have complete access to some of those sites. Going over to the Sanford Museum. This is a picture there, the front of their museum and their site. They had a lot of historical buildings. So like the logging church that they had here. This room was under about 12 inches of water, but then the whole foundation, the floor was just completely saturated. So we had to find ways to try and dry out the buildings, that we weren't going to encounter the mold and mildew issues there. You can see floor in the schoolroom was buckling up because it had absorbed so much water. And then even their log cart, their logging cart had been washed down the street, kind of came to rest against the pavilion there. Just kind of a lot of destruction and carnage when you first get on scene and see, wow, that's a lot of stuff to kind of deal with. So how are you going to deal with all of that stuff? Well, first of all, the requests for help came out about 12 hours after the floodwaters had receded and the staff was able to return to their museums. Midland was the first time that a heritage emergency responder had ever really worked on a large-scale disaster in Michigan. Both of the museums were really kind of unaware of the ICS system, or that HART responders or heritage emergency responders even existed. So this is still kind of a relatively new concept of having someone deploy to a scene like that. Sorry. I was able to deploy to the scene, be there in about 3 hours from the time that I got the official request for assistance. Now, when you have an emergency, the first hour of that emergency is really going to kind of dictate how easy or difficult the rest of the incident is going to be. The first person that becomes aware of the emergency situation is basically the incident commander. You're in charge of everything to begin with. The longer you wait to establish command and put an incident action plan in place, the harder it's going to be and the longer it will take to complete your emergency operations. You lose a lot of precious time that you need to save objects that may need stabilization when you wait or delay for that. You're really kind of racing against the clock to save those objects before mold or smoke particles or just environmental concerns really kind of overwhelm or damage your artifacts. So the sooner you can implement that incident command system, the better. Now, when you first get on scene, one of the most important things to do is to do a scene size up. In the fire department, we call it doing a 360 when you first get there. You want to gather as much information as possible when you first get there. You want to walk around and outside of the entire scene and get a view of everything that is affected. You want to keep your view as broad as possible while still taking in as much detail as you can, because those details really matter. Take notes when you do that 362. Those notes will really help you create your incident action plan. Your scene size up or your 360 is just as important for keeping your team safe as it is for rescuing your artifacts. And there are 6 things that you really want to note when you're doing your 360. The first thing is the number and the types of objects affected. Categorize them and get a rough estimate of how many things are affected, so that way you know kind of the size and scope of your work that you're going to be doing with your artifacts. The second thing is just kind of note the location and the extent of the damage. You also want to know just how that damage is affecting your artifacts. If you had a fire, well, not only do you have fire damage, you also have particulate damage, and you're most likely going to have water damage then too. So it's making notes of what you're dealing with in that aspect. The third thing is just the condition, the size, and the construction of the structures that you might be working in. If the emergency is in a building, did the disaster affect its structural integrity? Just because the fire department may have turned the building back over to you doesn't mean that it's really going to be the safest place to work. What type of buildings do you have? Do you have the necessary equipment to move objects to a safe place in those buildings? The fourth thing is just access to the building and then possible traffic paths. What areas are dangerous and how do you coordinate teams and keep them from those dangerous areas and allow them to move through the building, so that way they're not stepping on all over each other, creating choke points in the building. You want to be able to move and work around each other with ease. So part of it is just, how do you get in and out of the building without stepping on each other? 5, very important, are what are your hazards? Like I was saying before, while you may have access to the site, it doesn't mean that it's a safe environment. You have control over the building's power. Is the foundation or floor stable in that area? How warm or cold are the conditions that you're going to be working in? So just kind of establishing what are those hazards? What do I have to worry about for my crews working in there, so that way they can be safe and effective? And then the last thing is just developing conditions. You know, if you leave a situation unchecked, is it going to worsen or cause future issues? Does something need to be done with it sooner rather than later in order to stabilize the problem? And one of those things was we learned in Midland that the HVAC system, only half of them were working still. So we knew that, you know, as the days went on, it was getting hotter and hotter and more humid. You know, we were going to be working in pretty warm, humid situations. So we had to try and figure out what timetable can we get all this stuff out in, so that way we're not putting people's health at risk at all. So doing 360s, like in the fire department, you're looking at things like if you see a fire in the front of the building, well, what caused that fire? You get around to the back of the building and you realize, oh, power lines fell on the building, started the fire, and possibly energized a portion of that building. So it's that 360 is just incredibly important to really kind of know the whole scope of the situation that you're looking at. So once you've completed your 360, you should really have a good understanding of the size and scope of that emergency scene. Now you can kind of estimate how large of a workforce you need in order to effectively tackle the problem. So we were able to use the local museum association. We contacted the Michigan Museums Association, otherwise known as the MMA, put out a call to help for all their member institutions. You know, you want to put this call out immediately as soon as you have a good idea of how many people do we need. You know, they were able to function similar to how a 911 dispatch system works. Over the course of the disaster, we had over 100 museum professionals travel to the scene in order to respond to the calls. Social media and news agencies were kind of able to get out the word to the community, so that way letting the community know that their museum needed help. People from across the state, along with community members whose homes and businesses weren't affected by the flood, were able to come out. We had about 300 volunteers arrive on scene from as far as 175 miles away. So now that we had the manpower, how are we going to organize all of these people? Because with 400 people on top of all the staff at the museums all coming together, it's a lot of people to try and organize and manage. Well, if you've got the luxury of technology, use it. And you're not going to have that option at every scene. You might not have power, you might not have the ability to use computers or anything like that, but if you can, use it to assist you. We were able to get the museum's IT department in order to help create an automated check-in system for when the workers started to arrive. They were able to create QR codes for information and forms for individuals to read through and to fill out before they really kind of reported to the incident commander. Now, keep in mind that all of this is taking place at the height of COVID, so most everything is kind of on lockdown right now. The volunteers could walk up to each QR code and scan it with their phone and then fill in the necessary information, all while keeping adequate social distancing. Along with the volunteer form that was needed, they also had to fill out a COVID waiver form, read through a form that told them about the hazards of flood water, and then fill out their information sheet that they had to sign off on, along with a liability waiver form. Paper forms were available for those who didn't have smartphones, but just them being able to walk up and just kind of follow the signage and then use their phones to fill in the forms, all while keeping people spaced out, was just incredibly valuable. The system didn't really require anybody to man it, and it captured all the information that we needed and then disseminated all the information that the volunteers needed to really kind of understand the situation. So now we kind of get into the incident command system and really kind of how it's formed and how it works. There's a lot of classes that can teach you how to build your ICS skills. ICS 100 is free. You can take it right on the FEMA website. I will be honest with you, these classes aren't the most exciting things to go through, and it's not like watching an action movie, but there is just a ton of valuable and important and useful information in them. The ICS system for fire operations is really good at what it does, but it doesn't necessarily translate perfectly into the heritage emergency response that we want to use. You want to use and adapt the situation to the system to your situation and really kind of get it to fit your institution. So take the concepts of it and change and adapt things to how it fits for you. It can be very flexible. The really important thing is just to kind of understand the rules and concepts of it. These rules are really effective in your just kind of day-to-day operations as well as emergency situations. When you're managing people, you can use these rules to really kind of help you manage people, time, and resources outside of emergency situations. So understanding like chain of command means that there's going to be an orderly line to authority within ranks in the organization. Lower ranks are subordinate to upper ranks, connected to higher levels. You really, the people under you always report only to you, and you will always report to the person above you. You don't want to skip over ranks unless there's an immediate threat or danger. So always kind of keep that chain of command, so that way the people above you and below you are notified and informed of what's going on. The concept of unity of command means that every individual has only one designated supervisor. Only one person should be leading you, and you should never receive commands from more than one other person. Because imagine how confusing it is if you've got three people all yelling at you, trying to tell you what to do, and they're all giving you conflicting orders or commands or objectives of what you want to try and accomplish. Who do you follow? So your supervisor or your leading person should be the only person giving you commands. And again, it's if you have someone above you, you should only be receiving commands from that person. Don't kind of assume that if someone starts trying to tell you what to do, just inform them, hey, I've got to do what my supervisor is telling. Even if it's the incident commander, just explain to them, my supervisor is telling me this, just please kind of send it down the chain of command. Understanding like span of control, that it really kind of pertains to the number of individuals one supervisor can effectively manage. Management studies have shown that the span of control for a supervisor falls within a range of about 3 to 7 people. Really depending on the skills of the supervisor and the complexity of the tasks that are being worked on. General rule for the optimum span of control is 1 supervisor for every 5 subordinates. So emergency managers and fire departments have spent millions of dollars studying, how do you effectively manage time, people, and resources. So they've done all these studies, and they show that you can't, once you get outside of that 7 subordinates, you really can't effectively manage and control what's going on in that team. So now the system creates a hierarchy that divides the work between people, which facilitates easy management of the time, people, and resources that I was talking about. Every member of the system is assigned a specific task to execute in order to move that incident action plan forward. So I'm going to share my screen again here. So this is kind of an easy breakdown of just basically what the incident command system, just a very generic hierarchy of how the incident command system works, with the incident commander being on top. You've got the command staff directly underneath them, and then your section staff or your section leads underneath that. So your command staff is assigned to carry out the staff functions and support the incident commander. These people are your, the incident commander is the overall responsibility for managing the incident. They're the ones that are establishing the objectives, planning the strategies, and then implementing the tactics that are required in order to finish what you're trying to accomplish. You also have a safety monitor. This person monitors the operation to advise the incident commander on anything that has to deal with safety, the health and safety of the people working there. Just kind of a side note, you want to try and find some type of a medical professional maybe to work with one of these large scale incidents. If you have someone who's like a retired EMT or a retired firefighter that could work as your safety officer and be able to call them in, that'd be great. As heritage professionals, a lot of times we don't consider the type of environment that we're going to be working in during the disaster. Cuts and abrasions, allergic reactions, dehydration, hypothermia, heat stroke, all kinds of different things can happen while you're working on these operations. We're not working in our nice, normal, stable, calm museum environment or office environment. We really want to have somebody that's a medical professional there to deal with things immediately, and then be able to call in advanced life support if needed. So your liaison officer is going to kind of maintain a list of cooperating agencies and really interface with other agency representatives. So if you're working with a fire department, if you're working with police, if you're working with FEMA, that liaison officer is kind of contacting them and making sure that what we're doing on our side of things matches what they're doing on their side of things. So they're trying to make sure that there's good cooperation between all the different command systems. You have a public information officer. This person is your voice to the public. So they're working with media, they're working with the other jurisdictions and organizations that need information. So they're basically taking and interfacing and sending out as much information as they can. So that way it's a kind of a controlled flow of information that keeps people updated. We get to the section staff then. This is kind of your organizational level that's responsible of carrying out a lot of the tasks that are going on your emergency scene. Your operations section are the people that are touching and moving the objects. Your operations section lead should have a good working knowledge of the affected site. They want to organize, for Midland, we organize teams of about 3 to 5 community members along with a museum professional acting as that team leader. So again, we're within our span of control by having the 3 to 5 people. And then your museum professional as the team leader is able to kind of direct and supervise them on how do you handle artifacts? How do you move the artifacts? As we gathered more volunteers, we were able to establish divisions to kind of help organize teams by their location on the site. So they had like a blacksmithing area, they had a Victorian house area site. So we were able to kind of divide up and create division leaders that were able to supervise the teams underneath that would then report to the operations section lead. People, when they arrive on scene, they just want to jump in and grab stuff and try and help out. But those team leaders really need to keep track of your team members and guide them on how to properly do things. We don't want people to kind of freelance or just go rogue and hunt for tasks to do, because that will severely hamper your organizational efforts. Logistics and finance were combined into the next branch in this situation because they needed to be able to understand who was spending money on what for the logistics portion of it. So logistics' whole job is to go out and find the resources the operation needs to function effectively. In the museum world, you need the money. You can't just go out and acquisition things. So the logistics people needed the cash or the checks or the credit cards in order to pay for things that the runners were gathering. So in this case, we combined those two sections together, so that way the runners could go out and buy what they needed. Material requests from the teams would go to logistics, where the logistics lead, then the logistics lead would send runners out to go pick the stuff up that was needed. Now, with the flood kind of encompassing the entire area, a lot of stuff was sold out. So, absorbent pads, tarps, even duct tape was sold out at the local stores. So we were sending runners out, sometimes for an hour or 2 hour drive to try and find some of the resources we needed. So as soon as you can get your logistics section up and running, the better. So that way they're able to go out and find that stuff and keep your teams working efficiently. We had planning and inventory as a branch that's next. Within the museum world, we're tracking a lot more information than any fire department would really have to worry about. Inventorying and tracking accession numbers is incredibly important to us. So this branch is tracking those accession numbers as they're packed and then sending them on to a stable site or a conservation facility. You need to be able to track those artifacts and then plan out how to arrange them in their new temporary locations. That's why it's partially planning then too. Just this massive amount of information is being recorded and tracked. So you don't want to understaff this section, especially with a limited amount of time to save the artifacts or resources. you need to have the proper amount of people to track all of this stuff. Finally, we had an administrative branch. These are the people that were in charge of organizing the employees and volunteers, scheduling shifts, finding emergency funding, and then just working with vendors and figuring out how are we going to pay them. So there was some finance in with the administrative branch as well. We want to talk about now like the strategies and tactics of how are we going about organizing these teams and planning things. You want to come up with an incident action plan. It's otherwise known as an IAP. The incident commander, along with his command staff or section leads, will create that incident action plan. Your plan really needs to have achievable objectives for your teams within that current operational period in order to kind of complete your overarching goals. Find a way to keep track of all these people and their objectives on a really large surface. So if you can find a dry erase board, a chalkboard, or even just a big piece of paper, you want to keep track of who's on each strike team, what area they're working in, and then what that team's objectives are. I'm going to go back and share my screen yet again here. So this is kind of a slide that shows how an incident action plan is established. So your first phase is just really kind of understanding. That's your scene size up. Then phase two, what are your overall incident objectives? Phase three, get people together and plan for it. What is each team going to do? Phase four, prepare with the overall team and then disseminate that plan. Tell your teams what are they doing. This is, this team is going to go over to the railroad gallery and they're going to remove everything from these cases. Plan 5 is going to be to execute the plan, evaluate your progress, and then just kind of, adapt the plan as you see that progress. Some teams will work faster than others. Once that's done, you've completed that section of your plan, you're going to start all over again. This is a slide of the battle board, is what we call them, that we were using there in Midland. This one's kind of, it is at the end of the day, so we had dismissed a lot of the people that were there, but we tried to get a picture of it so that we could show, how we had set it up. In this case, we went into one of the classrooms, just ripped the dry erase board right off the wall, brought it out to where we set up our command center. So that way everybody could see what their task was, what team they were part of, where they were supposed to be working and what they were trying to accomplish at the time. It's very important that when people are on scene there, that they're checking in and checking out, so that way you can have accountability of where people were, what they were doing, just kind of keeping track of everyone, so that way you can have an efficient, effective response. So your objectives should really have a very clear-cut goal of what should be completed within a reasonable amount of time. One example is the overarching goal that we wanted was to have all of the wet archival materials to be frozen in the first 48 hours of the operation. And we want to make sure that mold and mildew isn't setting in, so we need to freeze that stuff. Another one was to create a strike team that would pack and clear out all the textile materials from their textile storage room. Several teams were able to go in and move things around and repack them or start that drying process on the textiles. You want the teams to work together to clear out all the cases and all the storage areas. When they would finish an area, the team would take a break and then they would wait to be reassigned to the next untouched exhibit area. Another team of building personnel was assigned to remove all the saturated drywall and insulation of the rooms that were emptied from artifacts. So it's not necessarily just work purely on artifacts. You can have teams that are working on trying to stabilize the building and remove a lot of that saturated wet material that's increasing the humidity within the facilities. And again, once the teams complete their objectives, they take that break and then get some food, get some water, whatever they needed to do, and then come back to the incident commander to be assigned a new task. Your operational periods really need to be kind of set up based on the complexity and the size of the incident. Your number of workers and the amount of stress placed on them can also be a factor then too. So we were doing 8-hour operational periods for Midland. That really kind of just determine the length of time that allows you to accomplish those goals, just really without burning out your workforce either. The weather was very warm, very humid, and we didn't have complete control over the HVAC system with the units kind of being burned out from the floods. So we didn't want to stress people too much. So volunteers came in, they'd work, take breaks, get water in them. We still had some people that were having some dehydration issues, but that safety officer was able to kind of take care of them. But again, just make sure that your operational periods don't burn out your workforce. As we got towards the end of the incident, remember that the ICS system is very flexible. So when you get towards the end of your mission, you're going to need less and less manpower. You can scale down the amount of volunteers you have on scene as you're rescuing your artifacts, and there's fewer and fewer things. You don't want to try and pack more people into smaller areas to try and just finish things up quickly. Just keep the appropriate amount of people in the areas, and as you're done, make sure you always thank your volunteers for their efforts, and then you can dismiss them. Once the emergency phase is complete, your emergency phase is really kind of complete once all the artifacts are in a safe and stable environment and there's not any immediate danger to those artifacts. Damage mitigation procedures have been implemented, and you're able to save the damaged objects. Command can then be terminated when all volunteers and workers are dismissed. You're still kind of not done with the emergency portion, though. You've got your continuance of operation plan. What do you have to do in order to keep your institution alive and active during your reconstruction and recovery phases? We knew there was going to be months, maybe well over a year before the museum would be open and available to the public again. We needed to brainstorm ideas to help the museum continue to serve its community and then raise awareness about the effects of the flood. The staff had to do a lot of out-of-the-box thinking because they won't be able to do normal museum operations. So what are your operations going to look like during your recovery time? They considered things like remote exhibits at various public locations, digital exhibits, what grant opportunities were out there to help them with their rebuilding, funding requests, using the flood to say, hey, we need funding in order to help repair and get your museum back in order. So sitting down with the staff and saying, hey, what can we do to keep your institution alive and relevant to the community and continue your mission without being able to use your main facility? Finally, what you want to do is an after-action review. So everything is safe, everything is packed away. Our artifacts that are affected are being treated. They're in a stable situation. So now we want to kind of go over the entire event and focus on what really went well. What happened? Why did it happen? What were the great things? What can we improve on? So once the emergency operations were completed, the command staff and the museum leadership and a lot of the team leads sat down together to perform that after-action review. Just kind of going over all of those where all the objectives met, what went well, what do we need to continue to do, what needs to be fixed and improved. You need to take this information and add it to your emergency plan, and you want to perform that after-action review immediately after. You don't want to wait a week or a month. You want to really do it while everything is fresh in people's memories and the details are still sharp. But take that information, add it to your emergency plan, and then practice it. This incident command system, especially if you have never done it before, you need to practice it periodically, really, in order to be proficient at it. There's a lot of moving parts in it, and to be an effective manager, you need to get that mind muscle memory kind of going. So that way, oh, this is what needs to be done. This is the sections that we need to set up. These are the teams that we need to set up. And it doesn't have to be an emergency situation. You can do trainings. You can use large events that your institution may be doing in order to practice it. So just train a lot, train constantly, train intensely. Get with your local emergency managers, your local fire departments, and involve them in the trainings. Local fire departments love to do trainings that are on site, being able to do walkthroughs of your facility and see your facility before an emergency happens there. So that way they understand the layout, and knowing that you guys understand the incident command system, and you can kind of be integrated in with their systems. That way it's a much more effective and efficient response. So that's what I got. I know I'm starting to run out of time here. So hopefully I didn't bore you guys with rambling on about the incident command system, but it's incredibly effective and efficient for managing those time, people, and resources you need in a disaster situation.